They thought he didn't stand a chance, but they had no idea what was coming from above. A blind elderly man was left stranded on a rooftop, helpless under the burning sun and the merciless weather, a cruel act of revenge. He couldn't. See? He couldn't escape. But what nobody saw coming was the arrival of a trained dog, ready to pull off the most impossible rescue of all. This story will move you and leave you breathless. Subscribe to the channel and discover how this dog defied all limits to save a life. And what came after was even more surprising. The dawn light filtered through the worn curtains of old Mr. Matthew Harrison's small apartment. At 75 years old, the elderly man maintained an unbreakable routine in the old Maple Gardens building, a complex of modest apartments located in the Riverside neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. Every morning after waking with the first rays of sun, he watered the potted plants on his balcony, feeling them with his wrinkled fingers to determine how much water they needed. Matthew had gradually lost his sight over the past 15 years due to macular degeneration. First it was the small print in newspapers, then the faces of people at a distance, until finally the world became a canvas of shadows and blurry outlines. Despite his condition, he refused to abandon his independence. "Good morning, Sentinel," he murmured in a hoarse voice while stroking the soft fur of his Belgian shepherd. The dog, jet black with an intelligent gaze, responded with a slight whimper and rested his head on his owner's knee. Sentinel was no ordinary dog. He had been trained by Ethan Foster, an old companion of Matthew's in the neighborhood association, before blindness completely consumed him. Matthew's apartment was modest but meticulously ordered. Each object had its designated place, allowing him to move without difficulty. In the corner of his bedroom, an antique cedar wardrobe held more than precisely folded clothes. Behind the sweaters and shirts at the back rested a sealed metal box containing secrets that could shake the foundations of the building where he had lived for more than 3 decades. "Mr. Harrison, may I come in?" The sweet voice of Lucy, the young woman from the neighboring apartment, resonated after 3 soft knocks on the door. "Come in, it's open," the old man replied, instantly recognizing the voice of his 28-year-old neighbor. Lucy Mercer entered with light steps. She was an elementary school teacher, always kind and attentive to the older residents of the building. At least that's how everyone perceived her. Her wavy black hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes, a deep brown, hid intentions that no one could guess. "I brought you sweet bread from Golden Wheat Bakery," she said, placing the paper bag on the table. "I got your favorite vanilla conchas." Matthew smiled with genuine gratitude. The small gestures of kindness were light in his world of shadows. "Thank you, my dear. Kindness is not forgotten in this old heart." Sentinel, however, did not share his owner's enthusiasm. When Lucy tried to pet him, the dog backed away and emitted a barely perceptible growl. Matthew couldn't see it, but he felt the tension in the air. "Your dog is acting strange today, Mr. Harrison," Lucy commented, withdrawing her hand. "Has he been eating well?" "Sentinel has always been cautious with people. Don't take it personally," the old man responded, although inside a small alarm went off. His dog rarely reacted negatively without reason. The conversation drifted to everyday topics: the unusual heat for April, the leaks in the building that no one repaired, the new tenants on the 3rd floor. But there was a subtle tension, as if both were dancing around unspoken words. "Mr. Harrison, I almost forgot," Lucy said suddenly. "Mr. Oliver, the new administrator, called an extraordinary meeting of the neighborhood association for tomorrow. They want to discuss maintenance. Fees." The old man nodded slowly. Oliver Thompson had arrived just 2 months ago as the new building administrator, recommended by the association president, Charles Davidson. His arrival coincided with unexplained renovations and increases in fees that no one questioned. "Do you know exactly what they're planning?" asked Matthew, feigning disinterest. "Not really," Lucy replied, "but Mr. Oliver mentioned something about reviewing the old association files. It seems they want to modernize the administration." The old man's body tensed imperceptibly. "The old files, the records, the evidence. That night, after Lucy left, Matthew waited until he heard the absolute silence of the building. With careful steps, he headed toward his wardrobe. His hands, wrinkled but firm, found the hidden metal box. He opened it with a small key that he always carried on a chain, along with a special whistle. Inside were documents that told a story of systematic corruption. 8 years ago, still an active member of the board while his vision deteriorated, Matthew had discovered irregular transfers, falsified invoices, and phantom contracts. Thousands of dollars diverted by Charles Davidson and his inner circle, including Richard Mercer, Lucy's father, who was then serving as treasurer. Matthew had meticulously gathered evidence, recorded conversations, saved copies of bank transfers. He planned to present everything to the authorities, but then Richard Mercer suffered a sudden heart attack. Although he survived, he was left with serious after effects. Guilt paralyzed Matthew, who feared that his complaint could worsen the man's health. He decided to remain silent, but never destroyed the evidence. A soft bark from Sentinel interrupted his thoughts. The dog was alert, ears erect, looking toward the door. "What's wrong, boy?" whispered Matthew. A creak in the hallway, footsteps trying to be silent, then absolute silence. Matthew quickly stored the box in its hiding place and closed the wardrobe. He headed to bed pretending normalcy, but his heart was beating fast. Something had changed in Maple Gardens. The past he had tried so hard to keep buried was beginning to awaken. What Matthew couldn't see was the figure stealthily moving away from his door. Oliver Thompson, with his robust build and penetrating gaze, had been listening. In his right hand he held a cell phone, and on the screen glowed a message sent to an unnamed number. "The old man has documents. We need to act soon." Meanwhile, in her fifth-floor apartment, Lucy Mercer looked out the window at the city lights. Her phone vibrated with a notification. As she read the message, her face took on an indecipherable expression, a mixture of guilt and determination. On her kitchen table, a framed photograph showed a man in a wheelchair, her father, Richard, who had confessed to her in tears months earlier about the fraud in the association and how Matthew had kept silent when he could have reported them. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, "tomorrow everything will change." Night enveloped the Maple Gardens building in an unsettling silence as 3 people remained awake, trapped in an invisible web of secrets about to be revealed. In his bed, Matthew stroked Sentinel, unaware that the next hours would test everything he had built and protected for years. The suffocating heat of that Thursday in April intensified as the sun rose over Portland, Oregon. In the Maple Gardens building, neighbors began their usual routines, oblivious to the web of intentions being silently woven between its walls. Matthew woke up restless after a night of intermittent sleep. From his open window, he heard the first sounds of the day, street vendors calling out, the impatient honking of cars, distant music from some radio turned on. Sentinel remained unusually alert, as if sensing the growing tension. "Let's go, boy," Matthew murmured as he prepared for his morning walk to the bakery. "Today we need to be more alert than ever." With his cane in one hand and Sentinel's leash in the other, Matthew left his apartment. The hallway smelled of cheap detergent and the food that Mrs. Susan, the neighbor from 2C, prepared every morning. Upon reaching the lobby, Oliver Thompson's deep voice stopped him. "Mr. Harrison, just the man I was looking for," said the administrator, approaching with heavy steps. "We have the board meeting this afternoon, remember?" The old man nodded, sensing something strange in the man's tone. Oliver was stocky, with large, rough hands that didn't seem to correspond to someone dedicated to administrative work. His arrival 2 months ago had been sudden, introduced as a property management expert by Charles Davidson. "Of course I remember, Mr. Thompson," Matthew responded with studied calm, "although I doubt my presence is really necessary since the latest changes have been decided without consulting all the residents." Oliver let out a forced laugh that sounded like paper being crumpled. "Your years of experience in the association are valuable, Mr. Harrison. In fact, we've been reviewing some old files and have questions that only someone with your knowledge could answer." At his side, Sentinel emitted a low growl. The dog could sense the hostility hidden behind the kind words. Perhaps we could have coffee before the meeting, Oliver continued, ignoring the animal's reaction. There are matters I'd prefer to discuss in private. I'll consider it, Matthew responded tersely. Now, if you'll excuse me, Sentinel needs his walk. As he moved away from the building, guided by his faithful companion, Matthew mentally reviewed the conversation. The mention of old files confirmed his suspicions. They were looking for evidence. Someone had talked. Someone knew he was keeping incriminating documents. At the Golden Wheat Bakery, the aroma of freshly baked bread welcomed him like a warm embrace. The owner, Connie, a 60-year-old woman with perpetually floured hands, greeted him with familiarity. "The usual, Mr. Harrison?" she asked while petting Sentinel, one of the few strangers the dog tolerated. "Yes, Connie, and perhaps a bit more to take away," he replied, leaning slightly toward her. "Could you do me a favor?" "Of course, whatever you need. If I don't come tomorrow or the day after, could you call my niece Ellen?" His voice dropped to a whisper as he handed her a small piece of paper with a phone number. "Tell her to check the bottom of my wardrobe. She'll understand." Connie took the paper with a confused expression but nodded without asking questions. She had known Matthew for decades and trusted his judgment. Back at Maple Gardens, Matthew encountered Rose Curtis, the doorkeeper of the neighboring building, a 70-year-old widow who had worked there all her life. Her gray hair gathered in a tight bun, and her lively eyes that missed no detail made her the unofficial chronicler of the neighborhood. "Mr. Harrison, how nice to see you," she greeted, caressing Sentinel. "I'm concerned about that new administrator. You have. He doesn't sit right with me. Yesterday I saw him arguing heatedly with a woman on the corner." "A woman?" asked Matthew, intrigued. "Could you see who it was?" "It was dark, but I'd swear it was the teacher from 2B, Don Richard's daughter." Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. Lucy and Oliver, the former treasurer's daughter and the mysterious administrator, connected somehow. "Rose, if you ever notice anything strange, anything unusual related to me, please contact this person," he said, handing her another paper with the same number he had given to Connie. "It's my niece, Ellen." The doorkeeper put the paper in her apron pocket, nodding solemnly. In all her years as the silent guardian of the neighborhood, she had learned to distinguish when someone had genuine fear. At noon, as Matthew organized the documents from the metal box in his apartment, a knock on the door interrupted his task. It was Lucy with her kind smile and a tray of home-cooked food. "I brought you chilaquiles, Mr. Harrison," she said, entering the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "I know sometimes you forget to have lunch when you're alone." The old man thanked her for the gesture. Although the new information about her kept him on guard, Sentinel, as always, remained distant from the young woman, watching her warily. "Mr. Harrison," Lucy began after a few minutes of trivial chat, "there's something I need to tell you about the building's roof." The old man tensed imperceptibly. "The Basai roof? I haven't been up there in years. This morning I saw something concerning. One of the railings is about to come loose. Since you supervised the last renovation 10 years ago, I thought you should know before the meeting. If you want, I can accompany you to see it now. It's better if we have evidence before confronting Charles and the others." The proposal sounded reasonable, even considerate. But something in Lucy's voice, an almost imperceptible tremor, set off all of Matthew's alarms. "I appreciate the information," he responded calmly. "I'll mention it at the meeting so they can send a professional to check it out. But it would be better if you could verify it personally," she insisted. "Your testimony would carry more weight. Everyone respects your experience." Matthew smiled, softly. "My eyesight is not what it used to be, Lucy. I doubt my testimony about the state of a railing would have more validity than yours." The young woman seemed momentarily disconcerted, but quickly regained her composure. "I understand, then I'll see you at the meeting this afternoon." "I'll be there," confirmed Matthew. When the door closed behind Lucy, Matthew went to the easy wardrobe and took out the metal box again. This time he removed only some key documents, put them in an envelope, and hid them under the lining of Sentinel's bed. The rest he left in the box, but added a small detail: a thin strand of his own. White hair between the lid and the body of the box, an old trick he had learned in his years as an accountant to know if someone had tampered with his files. The afternoon advanced inexorably toward 5 o'clock, the time of the meeting. Matthew decided not to attend. Instead, he prepared a small backpack with water, medications and some food for Sentinel. Something told him that events would precipitate soon, and he needed to be prepared. At 4:30, just as he was considering calling his niece Ellen to alert her, he heard a commotion in the hallway. Screams, a woman's voice crying, hurried, footsteps. He opened the door to find Mrs. Susan, the neighbor from 2C, in a state of distress. "Mr. Harrison," she exclaimed upon seeing him. "It's terrible. The ceiling in my kitchen is collapsing. There's water everywhere. Mr. Oliver says it's a broken main pipe and that everyone must leave while they check the system." The old man frowned. He hadn't heard any fire alarm, any official evacuation protocol. "Where is Oliver now?" he asked, as Sentinel positioned himself alertly by his side. "He went to look for the keys to the roof to turn off the main water valve," the woman responded between sobs. "Everyone is leaving. The meeting is cancelled." Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. The roof, Lucy's insistence. Now this sudden emergency, and Oliver's need to go up to the roof. The pieces fit together, forming a sinister pattern. "Mrs. Susan, could I ask you a favor? Go with the others. But if you see Rose, the doorkeeper of the neighboring building, tell her I need to speak with her urgently." The woman nodded and hurried away. Matthew closed the door and bent down to hug Sentinel. "I think they've set a trap for us, my friend," he whispered to the dog. "But they won't catch us so easily." He took the special whistle he always wore around his neck, a gift from Ethan, when Sentinel's training was completed. He put it in his pocket along with the dog's leash. Then, decisively, he headed toward the apartment door. In the hallway, now deserted, he could hear the distant echo of voices on the ground floor. The evacuation seemed real. Could he have misinterpreted the signs? Was his paranoia fabricating conspiracies where there were only coincidences? These doubts dissipated when, as he turned toward the stairs, a familiar voice stopped him. "Mr. Harrison, I'm glad I found you," said Lucy, suddenly appearing from the landing. "Everyone is downstairs, but Oliver asked me to help you go up to the roof. It's urgent. We need to check the main pipe before the damage gets worse." Her tone was kind, her explanation reasonable, but Matthew could feel the fear emanating from her like cheap perfume. "Of course, Lucy," he responded with a serene smile. "Sentinel and I will follow you." The trap was set, and Matthew, against all odds, was about to walk directly into it. The ascent up the stairs of the Maple Gardens building unfolded in tense silence. Matthew, leaning on his cane, climbed step by step with Sentinel glued to his left leg. Lucy walked a few steps ahead, casting furtive glances over her shoulder every few seconds. "It's a long way to the roof," commented Matthew in a calm voice, "especially for these old legs." "We can rest if you need to," Lucy replied, though her tone betrayed impatience. "That won't be necessary. I've walked these stairs thousands of times. I know every inch of this building," said the old man with an enigmatic smile. "Even now, when my eyes fail me, I could describe exactly where everything is." Lucy nodded uncomfortably. As they ascended, the heat intensified. The fifth floor gave way to a final section of narrower stairs that led to the metal door of the roof. "You know, Lucy," continued Matthew as they climbed the last stretch, "I've always been intrigued why some people choose the difficult path when they have alternatives." "What do you mean?" she asked with a tense voice. "The decisions we make, the paths we choose," he replied with a philosophical tone. "Your father, for example, was a good man who made some bad decisions." Lucy stopped abruptly, her body rigid as a statue. "What do you know about my father?" she asked with a thread of a voice. Matthew also stopped, leaning on his cane with dignity. "I know that Richard never forgave himself for what he did with the association's money. I know that his conscience tormented him more than any legal punishment could have done." Lucy's eyes filled with tears that she struggled to contain. "You don't know anything," she murmured. "My father lost everything because of that money. His health, his dignity. And now you're about to lose something equally valuable," added Matthew with sadness. "Your integrity." The young woman looked away. For a moment, it seemed she was going to abandon whatever she was planning. But then, from the top of the stairs, Oliver Thompson's harsh voice broke the moment of doubt. "Why are you taking so long?" growled the administrator. "The situation is urgent." Lucy instantly composed herself and continued climbing. Matthew followed her, discreetly petting Sentinel's head as a signal to remain alert. The metal door to the roof emitted a rusty squeak as it opened, revealing the vast and desolate space. The afternoon sun fell mercilessly on the concrete surfaces, creating suffocating heat. In the distance, Portland, Oregon, extended in all directions like an ocean of buildings and streets. "Mr. Harrison, over here," indicated Oliver, pointing toward the northern end of the roof. "The main pipe is behind that structure." The old man advanced cautiously. Sentinel, sensing the growing tension, walked with his body tense and ears erect. "It's strange," commented Matthew. "I don't hear any sound of running water. For a broken pipe, everything is very quiet." Oliver exchanged a quick glance with Lucy. It's under the floor," improvised the administrator. "We need you to help us identify exactly where the main pipe runs according to the original plans." Matthew nodded slowly, aware of the farce but determined to play along for the moment. "Of course. Let me orient myself," he said, walking toward the center of the roof. "The plans we approved years ago marked a specific route." He stopped, pretending to concentrate on remembering technical details while assessing his situation. The metal door through which they had entered was about 20 meters away. There was no other visible exit. Oliver had strategically positioned himself between him and the only escape route. "You know," continued Matthew, buying time, "this roof has an interesting history. We used to hold neighborhood meetings here in summer, before Charles and his friends decided it was unsafe." "Fascinating, Mr. Harrison," interrupted Oliver impatiently. "But we need to focus on the current problem." "Of course, the current problem," repeated the old man, turning to directly face Oliver and Lucy. "The problem of the $3 million diverted from the maintenance account 8 years ago. Or perhaps the problem of false invoices for renovations that were never done. Which of these problems are we referring to exactly?" Oliver's face hardened like granite. Lucy visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about, old man," spat Oliver, abandoning all pretense of kindness. "We're here for a real emergency." "No, Oliver, we're here because you're looking for documents that prove the fraud," responded Matthew with surprising calm. "Documents that could send Charles Davidson and his accomplices to jail. Documents that I kept for years because I didn't want to destroy Richard's family." Lucy stepped forward, with tears rolling down her cheeks. "My father suffers every day," she said with a broken voice. "His conscience tears him apart inside while you all live as if nothing happened." "And you think abandoning me here will solve anything?" asked Matthew softly. "Guilt doesn't disappear with more mistakes, Lucy." Oliver let out a derisive laugh. "How touching. The blind old man giving moral lessons," he mocked. "Listen, Mr. Harrison, this can be very simple. Tell us where the documents are and we can all go down peacefully. Otherwise—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the hot afternoon air. Matthew sighed deeply. "I always thought that when this moment came, I would feel fear," he said with a serene voice. "But strangely, I only feel pity. Pity for what you've become, for what you're willing to do." "Spare us the speeches," growled Oliver, approaching threateningly. "Where are the documents?" "In a safe place," answered Matthew. "And if anything happens to me, they'll go directly to the authorities." Oliver's expression changed. A mixture of fury and concern crossed his face. "You're lying," he muttered, but the doubt was evident in his voice. "Mr. Harrison," intervened Lucy with a trembling voice, "no one wants to hurt you. We just need those papers. My father is suffering. His health is getting worse every day. Guilt is consuming him." "Guilt isn't cured by destroying evidence, Lucy," replied the old man sadly. "It's cured by facing the consequences of our actions." Oliver lost his patience. With quick steps, he approached Matthew and roughly grabbed his arm. "Enough talk. You'll stay here until you tell us where those documents are," he threatened, gripping the old man's arm tightly. Sentinel reacted immediately, growling and showing his teeth. Oliver instinctively backed away. "Control that dog or I'll have to take measures," he warned, bringing his hand to the back pocket of his pants. Matthew stood up with dignity, despite the fear he felt growing inside him. "My answer is no, Oliver. I won't tell you where the documents are." The administrator looked at Lucy, who remained paralyzed a few meters away. "Then you leave us no choice," declared Oliver coldly. "Lucy, let's go. Our friend needs time to reconsider his position." The Tefamau young woman seemed confused. "But what's going to happen to him?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We'll come back later," replied Oliver with a sinister smile. "When the sun goes down and the temperature drops, perhaps Mr. Harrison will be more willing to cooperate. Or maybe by then, dehydration will have made him more reasonable." Matthew then understood the complete plan. They weren't planning to harm him directly. They would simply abandon him on the roof, under the scorching sun, without water or any way to orient himself or call for help. A blind old man trapped on a roof more than 6 floors up. Dehydration, exhaustion, or a misstep would do the work for them. "Come on, Lucy," ordered Oliver, heading toward the door. The young woman hesitated, looking alternately at Matthew and Oliver. "This wasn't in the plan," she murmured. "We were just going to scare him." "Plans change," cut off Oliver. "Would you prefer to see your father in prison?" Those words seemed to decide Lucy's internal conflict. With one last look of remorse toward Matthew, she followed Oliver to the roof door. "I'm sorry," she whispered so quietly it was barely audible. The metallic sound of the door closing resonated like a sentence. Then the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. And finally, footsteps moving away down the stairs. Matthew remained motionless, processing what had just happened. Beside him, Sentinel whimpered softly as if understanding the gravity of the situation. "We're in trouble, friend," murmured Matthew, stroking the dog's head, "but they haven't won yet." With careful steps, he began to explore the roof, using his cane to detect obstacles and determine the limits of the space. The heat was suffocating, and soon sweat soaked his shirt. Sentinel followed him faithfully, always staying close as if wanting to serve as an additional guide. "We need to find shade first," said Matthew, more to himself than to the dog, and then a way to communicate with the outside. After several minutes of methodical exploration, he found a small overhang that projected a strip of shade next to one of the walls. He sat there, catching his breath. His mind, still sharp despite the years, evaluated options. The building had 6 floors. Shouting for help was useless. Most of the neighbors would have left due to the false emergency, and the few who remained would hardly hear his calls from that height. His cell phone was in his apartment, as he rarely carried it with him inside the building. Then he remembered the whistle, the small metal instrument he carried along with the key to his document box. He took it out of his pocket and held it between his trembling fingers. This whistle was not ordinary. Ethan, Sentinel's trainer, had designed it specifically for frequencies that the dog could hear at great distances, even when, to the human ear, it barely emitted a faint sound. "It's our only hope, Sentinel," he said, bringing the whistle to his lips. "I hope Rose is at her post and that she remembers the message I gave her." With a deep sigh, Matthew blew the whistle. The sound, barely perceptible to him, made Sentinel prick up his ears immediately. The old man repeated the pattern several times. 3 short whistles, 3 long, 3 short. The ancient distress signal in Morse code, SOS. Meanwhile, on the ground floor of the building, Oliver gathered the confused neighbors, announcing that the emergency had been temporarily controlled, but that a technician would come the next day for definitive repairs. The false flood had served its purpose, evacuating the building and creating confusion. Lucy remained apart, with a lost gaze and visible remorse on her face. When Oliver approached to whisper something to her, she nodded mechanically. But her thoughts were on the roof with the old man abandoned to his fate. What neither of them knew was that Sentinel, trained to respond to that specific whistle, had begun his own rescue mission, and that in the neighboring building, Rose Curtis observed the scene with growing suspicion, wondering why Matthew didn't appear among the evacuees. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows over the roof of the Maple Gardens building. Matthew, sitting in the small patch of shade he had found, continued blowing the whistle at regular intervals. His mouth was dry, his lips cracked from the heat and dehydration. "Let's rest a moment, Sentinel," he murmured, putting the whistle back in his pocket. "We must conserve energy." The dog lay down beside him, his agitated breathing evidencing the effect of the heat. Matthew regretted not bringing water for his faithful companion. He stroked his fur, finding comfort in his presence. In Rose Curtis's apartment, the doorkeeper of the neighboring building, the afternoon was passing normally until a barely perceptible sound caught her attention. She put down the cup of tea she was holding and approached the window facing Maple Gardens. She couldn't see anything unusual, but something in that faint sound seemed familiar to her. "Mr. Harrison," she murmured to herself, remembering the paper the old man had given her that morning. She observed more attentively and noticed the unusual activity at the entrance of the neighboring building. Neighbors returning to their apartments, Oliver giving explanations with exaggerated gestures, but no sign of Matthew or his dog. Uneasiness grew inside her. She took the paper with the phone number and her cell phone, determined to call the old man's niece. However, before dialing, something else caught her attention, a distant bark that seemed to come from the roof of the building. "Michael, Michael!" she called to her grandson, a 17-year-old boy who spent afternoons with her since his mother, Rose's daughter, worked the evening shift at a nearby hospital. The teenager appeared at the door, with headphones hanging from his neck and a questioning expression. "What's up, Grandma?" "I need you to come with me to Maple Gardens. I think Mr. Harrison is in trouble." Michael knew Matthew well. The old man had taught him chess and had lent him books when he was younger. Without asking questions, he followed his grandmother. Meanwhile, on the roof, Matthew had found a new purpose for his cane. He was using it to rhythmically hit one of the metal pipes protruding from the floor, hoping the sound would propagate through the building. "Someone must hear us, Sentinel," he said with renewed determination. "We won't give up so easily." The dog, as if responding to his words, suddenly got up and ran to the edge of the roof, barking forcefully toward the neighboring building. On the ground floor, Lucy remained by the entrance, unable to leave. Guilt weighed on her like a slab. When the neighbors began to disperse, she stealthily approached Oliver. "We need to let him down," she whispered. "This has gone too far." Oliver looked at her with contempt. "Now you have scruples? It's too late for that. The old man will become reasonable when he feels real thirst." "But he's sick," he could. Lucy stopped, unable to complete the sentence. "Suffer a collapse? Fall?" Oliver shrugged. "It would be a regrettable accident. A blind old man who went up to the roof alone." Lucy backed away, horrified. "That wasn't part of the plan. We were just going to scare him into handing over the documents." "Plans change," Oliver responded coldly. "Charles wants those documents at any price. Your father should understand that better than anyone." The mention of her father made Lucy lower her head. Richard Mercer had been the treasurer when the diversion of funds occurred. His participation had been minor, manipulated by Charles but enough to involve him. The heart attack he suffered years later left him partially paralyzed and dependent on costly medical treatments. Charles had promised to help with the expenses if Lucy collaborated to recover the incriminating documents. The young teacher, desperate to help her father, accepted the deal without imagining how far it would go. "I'm going to see how he is," she finally decided. "Don't even think about it," warned Oliver, grabbing her arm. "Go home. I'll take care of everything." With a jerk, Lucy freed herself from his grip. "If anything happens to Mr. Harrison, I'll report it," she threatened, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I'll tell everything I know about Charles, about you, about everything." Oliver narrowed his eyes, evaluating her. "How touching, your sudden moral integrity," he mocked. "But don't forget that your father is as implicated as the others. Do you really want to see him behind bars in his condition?" Without waiting for a response, he walked away toward the interior of the building, leaving Lucy paralyzed by the dilemma. On the roof, Sentinel continued barking toward the neighboring building. Matthew, guided by the sound, cautiously approached to where the dog was. "What do you see, boy?" he asked, extending his hand in the direction of the barks, as if understanding. "The question?" Sentinel gently bit the sleeve of his shirt, pulling in the direction of the edge. Matthew tensed. They were on a 6th floor, too high for any desperate escape attempt, but then a distant sound caught his attention, a voice shouting his name. "Mr. Harrison, are you up there?" It was Rose's voice. The old man felt hope returning. "Here, Rose, on the roof," he shouted with all his might. "I'm locked in." Below, in the side street that separated the two buildings, Rose and Michael looked up, distinguishing the silhouette of the old man and his dog against the reddish sky of dusk. "You were right, Grandma," said Michael, impressed. "How did you know?" "Old people have our methods," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "Now, we need to help him down." Michael quickly assessed the situation. The two buildings were separated by a distance of approximately 5 meters. Too far for any crossing attempt. The access door to the roof would be locked from inside, and he doubted the administrator would allow them to go up. "Grandma, I'm going to try to climb up using the fire escape," the young man decided. "Maybe I can find a way to cross over to his roof." "It's dangerous, Michael." "Mr. Harrison is in greater danger," responded the boy with determination. "Call his niece while I try to reach him." Without waiting for approval, Michael ran toward the metal emergency staircase that zigzagged along one side of the building where they lived. With the agility of his age, he began to climb the rusted steps. Meanwhile, in the Maple Gardens building, Oliver climbed the stairs to the roof, determined to end the matter once and for all. Lucy's threat had upset him. He needed the documents immediately, before the situation became more complicated. Upon reaching the metal door, he heard sentinels barking and Matthew's voice shouting toward the neighboring building. Someone had discovered him. He had to act quickly. He opened the door. Brusquely, "Enough games, old man," he shouted, advancing toward Matthew. "Tell me where the damn documents are right now." The old man turned toward the voice, maintaining surprising calm. "I see patience isn't your virtue, Oliver." "Your time is up," threatened the administrator. "If you don't speak now, that dog of yours will suffer the consequences." Sentinel growled, positioning himself protectively in front of his owner. Matthew rested his hand on the animal's back, calming him. "The documents are in my apartment," he finally said. "Inside the lining of Sentinel's bed, there's an envelope with copies. The original is in the metal box in the wardrobe." Oliver smiled triumphantly. "See? It wasn't so difficult. Now, you'll stay here while I verify your story. If the documents are where you say, I might consider letting you down later." He turned to leave, but a furious bark from Sentinel stopped him. The dog was advancing toward him, showing his teeth. "Control that animal," he demanded, backing away. "Sentinel, responds to my orders, Oliver," replied Matthew with a serene voice. "And I'll only order him to stop if you take me downstairs right now." The administrator evaluated his options. He couldn't risk being attacked by the dog, but he also couldn't yield to the old man's demand. "This isn't over," he warned, retreating toward the door. "I'll be back with help." He hurried out, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock resonated again, leaving Matthew and Sentinel alone on the roof. "Good job, boy," he praised the dog, stroking his head. "We've bought Ellen some time. I hope Rose has contacted her by now." In the neighboring building, Michael had reached the roof and was evaluating the distance that separated him from Matthew. It was too far to jump, but he noticed something. That might serve. An old maintenance walkway that once connected both buildings, now reduced to little more than a rusted metal beam. "Mr. Harrison," he shouted. "It's Michael, Rose's grandson." The old man oriented himself toward the voice, feeling immense relief at recognizing it. "Michael, how wonderful to hear you, boy." "I'm going to try to cross over to you," announced the young man. "There's a beam connecting the buildings. It looks sturdy." Matthew paled. "No, Michael, it's too dangerous. Wait for help to arrive." But the young man had already made his decision. With the courage typical of youth that doesn't yet fully comprehend danger, he began to advance along the narrow metal beam, balancing with his arms outstretched. The sunset had given way to twilight, tinting the sky with purple tones that made visibility difficult. Each step required total concentration. A slip would mean a fall of more than 20 meters. In the street, Rose watched with bated breath while talking on the phone with Ellen, Matthew's niece, explaining the situation. A small crowd began to form, attracted by the scene of the young man crossing between the buildings. Lucy, who hadn't been able to leave, also watched from the sidewalk. Her face reflected the horror and guilt as she understood the consequences of her actions. Without thinking twice, she took out her phone and dialed a number. Emergency. I need to report a dangerous situation at the Maple Gardens building. On the roof, Matthew listened to Michael's cautious steps approaching along the beam. Sentinel occasionally barked, as if encouraging the young man in his dangerous crossing. "I'm almost there, Mr. Harrison," announced Michael, his voice tense from the effort and concentration. "Just a few more meters." The old man extended his hands in the direction of the voice, offering support for the last stretch. His ears, sharpened by years of blindness, caught another sound, the roof door opening again. It was Oliver, accompanied by Charles Davidson, the president of the association, a 60-year-old man with graying hair and an impeccable suit that contrasted with the chaotic situation. "What the hell is going on here?" demanded Charles upon seeing the young man approaching along the beam. Michael, surprised by the new voices, hesitated momentarily. His foot slipped, and for a terrible instant, it seemed he would fall into the void. He managed to regain his balance by clinging to the beam with both hands, hanging suspended a few meters from the edge of the roof. "Michael!" shouted Matthew, terrified by the sounds of struggle he heard. Sentinel reacted instinctively, running to the edge and barking forcefully, as if indicating the exact place where the young man was struggling to hold on. Charles and Oliver exchanged panicked looks. The situation had escalated beyond their control. A possible accident, witnesses, police, their entire plan was crumbling before their eyes. "Help him, for God's sake," pleaded Matthew. "He's just a boy." Charles, despite his involvement in the fraud, wasn't prepared to have the life of a young man on his conscience. He approached the edge and extended his hand toward Michael. "Take my hand, kid," he ordered with a firm voice. "Come on, one last effort." Michael, with his face pearled with sweat and arms trembling from the effort, pushed himself up and extended his right arm. His fingers brushed Charles's but weren't able to grasp them. Sentinel, observing the scene, seemed to make a decision. With a quick movement, he approached the edge and took the sleeve of Michael's jacket with his teeth pulling hard. This additional grip was enough for the young man to grab Charles's hand, who pulled him to the safety of the roof. Michael fell onto the concrete floor, panting, while Sentinel barked victoriously beside him. "Thank you," murmured the young man, petting the dog. "You're a hero." Matthew advanced, guided by the sounds, until he found Michael with his trembling hands. "Are you all right, boy? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Mr. Harrison," replied Michael, catching his breath. "Thanks to your dog and the gentleman." Charles seemed deeply disturbed by what had happened. His face, usually impassive, showed signs of moral shock. "This has gotten out of control," he murmured, running a hand through his hair. "Oliver, open the door. We're all going down right now." The administrator, visibly nervous, shook his head. "We can't let him go, Charles. He knows too much. He has evidence." "Shut up," ordered Charles, pointing toward the street where police patrol lights had begun to flash. "Look down. It's over." Indeed, 2 patrol cars had stopped in front of the building. Lucy's call had taken effect. The officers were entering the lobby while Rose received them, pointing toward the roof. Oliver paled. In one last desperate act, he lunged at Matthew, grabbing his arm. "Tell them it was an accident, that you came up alone, or I swear that—" He couldn't finish the threat. Sentinel, perceiving the danger to his owner, jumped on Oliver, knocking him to the ground. He didn't bite him, just immobilized him with his weight, growling menacingly. "Get this animal off me!" screamed Oliver, terrified. "Sentinel is just doing his job," replied Matthew calmly. "Protecting me." Charles, seeing that all was lost, collapsed onto a rusted metal chair, burying his face in his hands. 30 years building a name, a reputation, all for some damn documents. "No, Charles," corrected Matthew. All for your excessive ambition. The documents only show the truth. The sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the police. 2 officers emerged onto the roof, followed by Rose and, surprisingly, by Lucy. "There they are," exclaimed the young woman, pointing to Oliver and Charles. "They locked Mr. Harrison up here. It was part of a plan to force him to hand over documents that prove fraud in the building's association." The officers quickly assessed the situation. While one attended to Michael and Matthew, the other dealt with Oliver and Charles. "Everyone will go down to make statements," announced the senior officer. "This seems like much more than just an unlawful detention." As they descended the stairs, Matthew, supported by Michael's arm, and with Sentinel at his side, felt a great weight lifting from his shoulders. Years of silence, of keeping secrets that ate away at him from within, were coming to an end. In the lobby, Ellen, his niece, waited for him with tears in her eyes. She hugged her uncle tightly, whispering words of relief. "Uncle, what happened?" "Rose called me saying you were in danger." "A long story, dear," he replied, exhausted but serene, one that can finally be told in full. 3 weeks after the incident on the roof, the Maple Gardens building seemed like a completely different place. The Sunday morning shone with a special clarity as Matthew, sitting on one of the benches in the small community garden, enjoyed the warmth of the sun on his face. Sentinel rested peacefully at his feet, occasionally wagging his tail when a neighbor passed by with a greeting. "Mr. Harrison, I brought you coffee," said a familiar voice. It was Michael, who had become a regular visitor since the rescue. "My grandma says you need more sugar in your diet." The old man smiled, accepting the hot cup. "Your grandmother is always worrying about everyone. How are your studies going?" "Better than ever," replied the young man enthusiastically. "The School of Architecture has offered me a partial scholarship for the renovation model I designed for this building." Indeed, Maple Gardens was in the midst of transformation. After the arrest of Charles Davidson and Oliver Thompson, an exhaustive investigation had revealed the full extent of the fraud. Millions of dollars diverted, falsified invoices, phantom contracts. The documents Matthew had kept for years proved crucial in supporting the case. The association, now led by a provisional committee of neighbors, had decided to use the recovered money to carry out the long-postponed renovations. And Michael, inspired by his experience on the roof, had designed a project that included adaptations for people with disabilities and more accessible common areas. "I'm glad to hear that, young man," said Matthew sincerely. "I always knew you had potential for great things." The sound of cautious footsteps interrupted the conversation. Matthew immediately recognized the soft perfume and light step. "Good morning, Lucy," he greeted, surprising the young woman who had stopped a few meters away. "Mr. Harrison, I didn't want to interrupt," she responded with a timid voice. Since that night, Lucy had kept her distance, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. Despite having been the one who called emergency services, her initial participation in the plan couldn't be easily erased. "You never interrupt," assured the old man, indicating the empty space on the bench. Michael was about to leave for his classes, wasn't he? The young man, catching the hint, nodded. "That's right. I don't want to be late. I'll see you both later." When Michael walked away, an uncomfortable silence settled between Matthew and Lucy. Finally, she spoke with a broken voice. "I've come to say goodbye." "We're moving tomorrow, my father and I." Matthew nodded slowly. It wasn't a surprise. Richard Mercer, although implicated in the fraud, had received a reduced sentence considering his health condition and his cooperation with the authorities. Even so, the scandal had made their stay in the building untenable. "Where will you go?" asked Matthew. "To Ashland. I have an offer to teach at an elementary school there, and the climate will be better for Dad's health." Another silence, this one denser than the previous one. "Mr. Harrison, began Lucy, her voice breaking. "There are no words to express how sorry I am. What I did—" "What you did in the end was the right thing," interrupted the old man gently. "You called the police. That's what counts. But before that, I lied to you. I deceived you. I led you into that trap." Matthew extended his hand until he found hers, squeezing it with warmth. Fear and love can lead us to make mistakes, Lucy. You loved your father. You were afraid of losing him if he went to prison. I acted the same when I discovered the fraud and kept silent to protect him after his heart attack. Silent tears ran down Lucy's cheeks. How can you forgive me so easily? It's not easy to forgive, he replied, with the wisdom of his years. But it's necessary to continue living. Resentment only consumes the one who harbors it. At that moment, Sentinel approached Lucy and for the first time gently rested his head on the young woman's knee. It was as if the dog was also offering his forgiveness. I think you've been officially accepted, joked Matthew, feeling the movement. Sentinel doesn't usually do that with just anyone. Lucy stroked the animal's fur with a sad smile through tears. Thank you, she murmured, and they both knew that this simple word contained much more than superficial gratitude. May I ask you one last favor before you leave? Asked Matthew. Anything. In Ashland, start anew. Not as Richard's daughter, not as the teacher who got caught up in a scandal, just as Lucy, the young woman who has a whole life ahead of her to do good. She nodded, although she knew the old man couldn't see her. I promise, she replied with a firm voice. Meanwhile, in the building's lobby, Ellen, Matthew's niece, was coordinating the installation of a new community directory. Since the incident, she had temporarily moved in to care for her uncle, although he insisted he could manage on his own. Ellen, a lawyer by profession, had taken an active role in the legal restructuring of the association. Her experience proved invaluable in navigating the complicated judicial process that followed the discovery of the fraud. Do you think I should include Connie on the Cultural Activities Committee? She asked Rose, who was supervising the work from her chair. Of course, that woman has more energy than many young people, replied the doorkeeper. Besides, her vanilla conchas are irresistible. No one would miss a meeting if she brings her pastries. The two women laughed, sharing the lightness that had returned to the building's atmosphere. How is Mr. Harrison? Asked Rose, looking toward the garden where the old man and Lucy were talking. Surprisingly well, replied Ellen. Sometimes I think he's stronger than all of us put together. You know what he told me yesterday? That these events, though painful, have brought light to his life. Rose nodded understandingly. When you carry a secret for so long, releasing, it is like removing an immense weight. I've seen that change in many neighbors. Now they greet each other, talk, share. Before, everyone lived enclosed in their own worlds. Indeed, Maple Gardens had experienced a transformation that went beyond the physical. The neighbors, shaken by recent events, had rediscovered the value of community. They organized shifts to accompany older residents, offered to do shopping for those who couldn't go out, shared meals, and celebrations. That night, the first General Assembly under the new administration would be held. The central courtyard, newly renovated, had been prepared with chairs and a small platform. Ellen had spent the week preparing clear reports on the building's real financial situation and options for the future. When the sun began to set, Matthew returned to his apartment to prepare for the meeting. Sentinel guided him with the same loyalty as always, but now he seemed more relaxed, as if he too had left behind a burden. The apartment looked different. Ellen had reorganized the furniture to facilitate her uncle's movement, had labeled objects with the Braille system, and had installed a new doorbell system that Sentinel could activate with a special pad if Matthew needed help. As he changed clothes, the old man reflected on the unexpected turns of life. At 75, when he thought his days would pass in silence and routine until the end, he had become the catalyst for profound change. Who would have thought, Sentinel? He murmured to the dog, adjusting the tie Ellen had prepared. It seems we can still be useful in this world. At 7 o'clock sharp, the central courtyard was full. Residents of all ages occupied the chairs arranged in a semicircle. Even those who rarely participated in community activities had come, moved by curiosity or the genuine desire to be part of the building's rebirth. Ellen helped Matthew locate himself in a special seat in the front row. Next to him, Rose and Michael completed what the neighbors had affectionately begun to call the Rescue Committee. Sentinel, with a new kerchief tied around his neck, a gift from the building's children, lay obediently at his owner's feet. The assembly began with Ellen presenting a detailed summary of the current situation. With clarity and transparency, she explained how the money had been diverted, how much had been recovered, and the ongoing legal procedures. She didn't hide the challenges they faced, but her tone conveyed hope and determination. Then it was Michael's turn, who projected onto an improvised screen his designs for the building's renovation. Wheelchair ramps, additional handrails in the hallways, an accessible alarm system for people with different disabilities, and a community garden on the roof, transforming that place of dark memories into a space of coexistence and life. When the presentations ended, Ellen approached Matthew and whispered something in his ear. The old man nodded and, with the help of his cane and his niece, slowly made his way to the center of the improvised platform. A respectful silence descended over the assembly. Everyone now knew the complete story of what had happened, how Matthew had kept the evidence of fraud for years, how he had been deceived and abandoned on the roof, and how his faithful dog and young Michael had achieved a rescue that seemed impossible. "Good evening, neighbors," he began with a clear and firm voice. "I didn't prepare a speech. At my age, I trust more in words that are born in the moment." A collective smile spread through the audience. "For many years, I lived among you like a shadow, especially after losing my sight. I became invisible, not because of your indifference, but because of my own isolation. I kept a secret that weighed on me, that separated me from everyone. I thought silence would protect those I cared for, but it only hurt us all." He paused, and in that brief silence, Sentinel was heard to emit a soft whimper, as if underlining his owner's words. What happened on that roof was terrifying, yes, but it was also revealing. I discovered that I wasn't as alone as I thought, that my dog, trained to be my eyes, could also be my voice when I couldn't cry for help, that neighbors like Rose and her grandson Michael would risk their safety for a stubborn old man like me, and that even those who had chosen the wrong path, like Lucy, could find the courage to do the right thing. His words resonated in the courtyard with an intensity that captured everyone's attention, from restless children to elderly people who nodded with understanding. Today we begin a new stage in Maple Gardens, not as strangers who share walls, but as a community that cares for each other. The eyes that I lost, I have recovered, multiplied in each of you who now watches out for the well-being of others. Matthew extended his hands forward in a gesture that encompassed all those present. This is my proposal for our renewed association, that besides fixing pipes and painting walls, we renew our way of living together, that no neighbor feels invisible or abandoned, that the hand that today helps an old man climb the stairs, tomorrow is the hand that another holds when needed. Rose was the first to applaud, quickly followed by Michael and Ellen. In seconds, the entire courtyard resounded with applause and expressions of approval. Matthew smiled, moved but serene, while Sentinel barked joyfully at his side. In the last row, almost hidden in the shadows, Lucy observed the scene with a mixture of admiration and nostalgia. Tomorrow, she would leave for Ashland, leaving behind not just a building, but a valuable lesson. She promised herself that wherever she went, she would carry with her Matthew's words about forgiveness and second chances. In the months that followed, Maple Gardens gradually transformed. The physical renovations progressed at a good pace, but the most significant changes occurred in the social dynamic of the building. A support system was established for older or disabled residents. Children offered to run errands for the elderly. Adults organized shifts to accompany those who needed to go to the doctor or handle complicated procedures. Matthew's apartment became an informal meeting point. Neighbors came to him for advice, for stories about the old building, or simply for the pleasure of his company. Ellen, who had planned to stay temporarily, decided to move permanently, renting an apartment on the same floor as her uncle. The roof, once the scene of fear and desperation, was transformed according to Michael's design into a community garden. The exact spot where Matthew had been trapped now housed a small greenhouse where they grew aromatic plants and flowers. The young architect in training had insisted on this symbolic detail, transforming the darkest place in the story into the brightest and most vital point of the building. 6 months after the incident, on a sunny autumn afternoon, Matthew received a letter from Ashland. Ellen read it aloud to him. Lucy told them about her new life, her work at the school, the improvement in her father's health, and most importantly, she had started a reading program for the elderly in her neighborhood, inspired by what she had learned at Maple Gardens. "It seems your message traveled far, Uncle," commented Ellen, folding the letter. Matthew nodded, stroking Sentinel, who was dozing at his feet. "That's how second chances work, niece. They don't just change one life, but create ripples that touch other lives, which in turn touch more lives." That night, as Ellen prepared dinner, Matthew sat in his favorite armchair by the open window. He couldn't see the sunset, but he felt its warmth gradually fading. From the courtyard came the laughter of children playing, the conversations of adults, the sound of a guitar that someone had begun to play. Sentinel, always attentive, rested his head on his owner's knees, as if asking what he was thinking about. "You know, boy," murmured Matthew, scratching the dog's ears, "sometimes the worst storms bring the best dawns, and sometimes just when we believe our purpose in life has ended, we discover it's just beginning." The dog emitted a soft whimper of approval, as if perfectly understanding the depth of those words. On the horizon, invisible to Matthew, the sun finished setting, but its warmth remained in the renewed heart of Maple Gardens, that building that had gone from being a complex of isolated apartments to becoming a true home for all its inhabitants. And so, in the twilight of his life, Matthew Harrison had found a new dawn, transforming from silent victim to beacon of hope for an entire community that now navigated with a firm course toward a brighter and more supportive future. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Matthew, Sentinel, and the transformation of Maple Gardens has moved you as much as it moved us in narrating it. This tale reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is always the possibility of finding light and renewal. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about second chances and communities that unite in the face of adversity. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life. Do you know any real stories of improbable rescues or transformed